this is real. And I think David Cameron will have thought long and hard about using the analogy. And it's very, very dangerous, obviously, when you bring in Hitler in any analogy, as Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's not the brightest spark on the Hill, completely misinterpreted what he was saying and used it as an excuse, as it were, to dismiss what he was saying. It's a very edgy thing for a British Foreign Secretary to say. And we know in our own country, when the Americans give us their views on our policy, we tend to react against it. But nevertheless, I agree with Diane. I think anyone who understands history and any American who understands America's place in the world and what is in America's self-interest will understand that the defense of Europe is the first station that you need to be at.
Let's go on to discuss Lord Cameron, David Cameron, who actually is speaking at a news conference just now with the Polish foreign minister. We're listening across that. We'll bring you anything that you need to hear from that press conference. But the foreign secretary has urged Republicans in the House of Representatives to vote for a $95 billion funding deal for Ukraine after it passed the Senate. He compared those who opposed the bill to the people who appeased Adolf Hitler in a spiky article for the conservative Washington blog The Hill. And an unlikely row has broken out between the Foreign Secretary and one of the favourites to be Donald Trump's running mate if he gets the Republican nomination. That's Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Here's what she told Sky News last night.
I think he tried to compare us to Hitler also. And if that's the kind of language he wants to use, I really have nothing to say to him.
Well, he likened you to an appeaser to Hitler in not voting through funding for Ukraine. Are you an appeaser for Putin?
I think that I really don't care what David Cameron has to say. I think that's rude name-calling, and I don't appreciate that type of language. And David Cameron needs to worry about his own country, and frankly, he can kiss my ass.
But do you think Putin's the good guy in all this?
That door gets louder and louder every time I hear that clip.
Very dramatic, I have to say. Diane, let's start with you here on David Cameron's own sort of choice of language, and why does he feel the need to kind of weigh in on a kind of US domestic policy issue, albeit clearly with international connotations, repercussions, etc. Is this appropriate from the Foreign Secretary?
I think it is appropriate that friends talk to each other, and if they can't be heard in the normal diplomatic, quiet way, then yes, getting attention for this is really important. I mean, I think some of these Americans, Marjorie Taylor Greene may be one of them, need to learn a bit of history. Standing aside and trying to be isolationist didn't help America in the Second World War stop the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor, and much more recently, on 9/11. The attack on America led to the first NATO use of Article 5. Interestingly enough, that announcement made by a British politician who was head of NATO at the time, when the rest of the democratic world came in to support America at that time. So these things are not just domestic. What America chooses to spend on Ukraine will help Europe in the short term because that's the closest threat from Putin. But actually, there are other players out there, and we need the democratic world to pull together and not see this as just a regional conflict of Europe at the moment. But actually, it is about democratic nations saying we will keep our borders safe. We will not give in to autocrats who invade other countries, whether that be from the air and 9/11 or by planes straight into Pearl Harbor or any other attacks.
Yeah.
So if America won't listen to quiet diplomacy to see what's in the good of America and in Europe, then maybe some rattling of the cage was the right way to do it. Unusual though that is for a foreign secretary.
Unusual indeed. Ed, on that point then, what does this sort of, how much can we read into this about David Cameron's own approach and strategy to being foreign secretary, to executing that office? Does this give away sort of a method or a tactic, perhaps, a way of thinking in the Foreign Office now?
I'm not sure whether it is...
Oh, sorry, we'll go to Ed first on this one.
Well, it's good to see David Cameron reunited with his old Bullingdon Club mate, Radek Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland. They were at Oxford together. Ironically, I'm in Poland as well, not with the foreign secretary. And I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau yesterday. And the history of World War II feels very alive in Poland. And we're in Krakow, which is quite close to the Ukrainian border. This is real. And I think David Cameron will have thought long and hard about using the analogy. And it's very, very dangerous, obviously, when you bring in Hitler in any analogy, as Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's not the brightest spark on the Hill, completely misinterpreted what he was saying and used it as an excuse, as it were, to dismiss what he was saying. It's a very edgy thing for a British Foreign Secretary to say. And we know in our own country, when the Americans give us their views on our policy, we tend to react against it. But nevertheless, I agree with Diane. I think anyone who understands history and any American who understands America's place in the world and what is in America's self-interest will understand that the defense of Europe is the first station that you need to be at. If Ukraine does fall to the Russians, for example, in the next few years, that will make America's position in the world much more fragile in terms of its relationship with China, an emboldened Russia that will threaten Europe and America's interests in Europe. So I think Cameron is right to call them out, but he would have thought very long and hard about it, because he would have known that he could expect this kind of reaction from the more extreme wing of the Republicans, particularly given Trump's position on NATO.
We have been watching David Cameron speaking in Poland alongside the Polish Foreign Secretary. We've also been reflecting his comments regarding the US and their support, or otherwise, for more funding for Ukraine. Well, despite criticism from American Republicans, Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, has doubled down on the comparison between current events in Ukraine and dealing with Hitler before the Second World War.
I see this as the challenge of our generation. Two foreign ministers standing here today, it's like two foreign ministers standing here in the 1930s, where we faced a similar challenge from a similar aggressive dictator who was trying to change Europe's boundaries by force, who was ignoring the sovereignty and inviolability of other countries' borders. That's what we face today with Putin. And the challenge is, do we have the political will to match it? It's perfectly obvious that we've got the military power. It's perfectly obvious we've got the economic power, that we have the diplomatic power, that collectively our economies outmatch Russia by 25-1. The question for us is whether we have the political will. I know that Poland does, I know that Britain does, and we'll do everything we can to persuade all our allies to commit to helping Ukraine in all the ways that we are doing.
Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, speaking in Poland. More developments, I'm sure, throughout the day on that for you on Times Radio.